Known unknowns and the challenges of endpoint protection. My name's Kevin Magee. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Microsoft Canada. Welcome to the session. Hope you're having a great day. I have assembled an elite crew of incredibly talented professionals here today that can talk to you about endpoint protection, what the future of endpoint protection is, what the nature of endpoint protection is, where it's going, what the trends are, and what we should be thinking about. So let's jump right into it and meet the team we've assembled today. Kirsten, could you say a few words and introduce yourself and let us know a little about you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm really grateful to be able to have this time today to share with fellow panelists and everyone out there. So thanks again. So Kirsten Turnbull, I'm a technical specialist at Microsoft. I have spent the last 20 years in cybersecurity, mostly from a network perspective. Really, the last part of my career was spent in the OT, IoT environment. So traveling across North America and really getting visibility into these environments. And yeah, definitely excited to share some lessons learned here.
And Justin, can you tell us a little about yourself and your background as well?
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for everybody for joining us today. I've been with DarkTrace coming up on 6 years. So from the beginning days of startup to now publicly traded company. And like Kristin, I've been in this industry for close to 20 years now. It sounds scary to say that out loud. And a large portion of that was supporting the United States intel community on issues of counterterrorism and cyber operations.
And Juan, we're very welcome to have you as well too. Can you tell us a little about yourself and your background as well?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining the session today. It's a great honor to be part of this panel and thank you for the opportunity. I am Juan Valbuena, Director for Cybersecurity at Yamana Gold. That will include IT and OT security for the mine site as well. I have been in the industry for over 20 years. Only the last 5 years, I have been kind of doing similar kind of roles in kind of in leadership positions. And yeah, definitely a great opportunity for us to kind of share more of our experience today.
Awesome. I think the big question for me is, and when we initially talked about this session, it's not just the known and unknowns. What an endpoint is almost becoming a known unknown or an unknown unknown. Think about today, what is an endpoint? Is it a PC? Is it a mobile device? Is it an Xbox? Is it a CNC machine? Is it a light bulb? Is it a fridge? Is it a car? Tell us what you think. What is an endpoint today, Juan? And where should we be thinking about the future of how we define an endpoint as well?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and definitely something that we ask ourselves very regularly. For us, in a nutshell, or in the way we kind of take it, endpoint is any kind of device that will be able to kind of process any information that at the end of the day kind of supports the operations of the business directly or indirectly. And that will include the usual suspects, right? So laptops, desktops, mobile phones, but also when we talk about our operations, we get closer to things like PLCs, a system that kind of sends different things or send kind of telemetry in a way. Other things that will help kind of move stuff around. So definitely our kind of definition of endpoint has been growing quite significantly. At the same time, the requirements kind of to protect those endpoints kind of increases and changes and evolves with the business kind of demands as they are kind of evolving as well.
Justin, I know you and I have talked in the past about, what is a car? Is it a data center on wheels? Is it an endpoint? What are some of your thoughts around, what is an endpoint today and what should we be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, especially as we're all, still in that work from home environment, we're surrounded by, IoT, which Kristin, I'm sure, could shed some scary light on in a little bit. But, you nailed it on the head. I mean, endpoints are rolling down the street now. They're in the traffic lights. They are literally everywhere. And not to mention, while we can't really define what an endpoint is, we can't define what the perimeter is either. So as the perimeter has disappeared, all of these different things that normally would have sat outside that perimeter are becoming a part of our organizations or introducing risk. So really, it's as Juan put it, anything in this day and age that processes information, whether it's in your home or in the OT environment.
And Kirsten, you've got an OT background that's really interesting. You've probably thought of some things that we've never even considered of endpoints that are endpoints as well. Would love your take on, what is an endpoint? How is it evolving? And maybe some examples of some cool endpoints that you've come across in your career.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing I think about is, the evolution of really why did endpoint protection really need a magnifying glass on it? And I think really from an IT perspective, we had all the tools in the world to inspect the network traffic. But once we started to realize that that traffic was more and more growing increasingly encrypted, that a lot of the tools that we were using from a network perspective, we were kind of blind to as to what was going on. And so really we wanted to get visibility. And I mean, I'm a visibility champion. I think we need more visibility, always more visibility all the time. And what was taking place was we didn't have enough details about the execution of the malware on the endpoint host. And this need to get further information, I think, really built the EDR tool, because now we have all the data at the endpoint. So we don't have to worry about encryption. We can really see that form. But then you go over to the OT side and you realize really quickly that most of these devices will never run any type of endpoint protection. They are not built for that type of software. And if it were to run endpoint, it would have to go through rigorous testing with the vendor. So we're kind of left in a situation where if we don't have the ability to run endpoint, we really, really need to rely on the visibility of that endpoint. And so kind of balancing that risk relationship with, okay, if I'm not going to be able to protect it, I need to see so that I can set up protections in place, to really have eyes on that. So I think I've had the fortunate experience of seeing what IT did and then taking a look at the OT side and really taking some of the lessons learned there and applying them in the OT landscape.
So what are some of the strangest endpoints you've seen?
Escalators. I mean, that was the one that kind of blew me away. Like, I didn't realize escalators had IP addresses, but they do. Elevators, really when you start really going into those networks and discovering the IP addresses, and as Juan said, and I think Justin, you had mentioned this earlier too, is just anything with an IP address, that's a target.
So what happens if it doesn't have an IP address? So Kristin, maybe give us some background on that. And I know, Juan, you have some experience in this area as well too.
Yeah, I think you need to have visibility. Again, I'll go back to that. And there's products out there that give you visibility into layer 2 devices. So if it's only a MAC address, still being able to identify what is that asset? Is it a relay? Does it have a serial number? What's the firmware? Because really, I really care about the firmware. If it's exploitable and it still is just a level 2 device, that means that it can be attacked.
I would just also add, just because it doesn't have an IP address doesn't mean it won't be communicating with other devices that do have one. So that's where I totally agree with Kristin that, understanding those behaviors is important, when you do have encryption. But I think visibility, as you've said already, is so paramount in today's day and age where our networks are getting more complex, not dumber, not simpler. And watching the behaviors of how devices actually interact with each other, whether there's a person behind them or not, can really be a truth teller when trying to discern what's happening.
Justin, strangest endpoint you've ever come across?
A parking meter. So a customer that managed those garages, and the parking gate was compromised, and they were serving adult content on it. So it sounds straight out of a comedy, but yeah, you can't make this stuff up.
We didn't rehearse this one, so this is fantastic. So we're already off script. I love it. Juan, what's the strangest endpoint you've come across as well?
Yeah, probably I cannot consider the simple house door lock now. They have IP addresses now. You can actually manipulate it, connect it to your Wi-Fi. Open the door when you want to let somebody open remotely, that kind of thing, which is kind of scary, right? So, but yeah, so that's the kind of the level of thing that you have to kind of start kind of looking.
Wait until we start getting ransomed out of our own houses and have to pay Bitcoin just to access our own house.
Let's be real. Everyone on this call that's technical probably either has their IoT network locked down tight or doesn't have an IoT network, because we don't believe in that.
But now I'm leery of escalators. Well, that's a great segue to the next thing we wanted to talk about. Is it's not just devices, it's not just attackers. We're seeing new technologies overlap with older, technologies as well. So you've got artificial intelligence and OT devices without even a MAC address, or with a MAC address without an IP address. We're seeing a real mix, and we're seeing the ability to use and leverage AI to really change the stance for defenders, and to really leverage AI to tip the economics and the acceleration and scale in the favor of the defender away from the attacker. So Justin, I know this is an area where you have a great deal of experience. It's an area where I have very little experience, so I'm going to ask a ton of questions questions with you folks and see where we think this is headed. What do you think, Justin? How is AI really going to change the game for the endpoint protection space?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, it's really just a data, question when you think about it. Our networks are throwing even more data at us now. Kristin made a great reference earlier to, just looking at the packets. Well, we've got more packets to watch now. And we all know the common problem in our industry is there's not enough humans to go around and actually do the job. But even if we did have the humans, we're getting to a point where we just don't have the compute power to find those patterns within these data sets. And let me remind everybody, the data sets we're talking about, network traffic, change thousands of times per second. So artificial intelligence is the perfect tool for this, being able to look at structured and unstructured data and just spot patterns, whether it's anomalies or patterns that you would have hoped to find. But just analyzing that data is the biggest win, in my opinion, when it comes to the AI revolution we're kind of all living through right now.
So, and do you think that, Justin, that presents a challenge for folks? I mean, we're struggling to keep up in all areas of technology. Now we're asking people to not only stand some of these advanced IoT, OT technologies, but also to learn how to implement AI. Are we asking too much of the modern day defender or organizations as well?
Well, I think the great news is, I've been doing this now for 6 or 7 years in the AI space. And I remember years ago when I was on the soapbox, we didn't even use the term AI, it was machine learning. So it just goes to show you how much it has evolved and become a mainstream concept. And it's not cybersecurity only, it's logistics, it's fraud detection. There's so many industries that are already adopting it that I do think the barrier to entry is much lower for organizations. Now, the first thing I tell every organization before your board tells you go out and use AI and invest in it, make sure you understand the problem you're trying to solve and using the right form of AI to solve that. We could talk for hours, so I won't go into it today, but just definitely make sure you understand the different types and the different approaches before kind of going down that rabbit hole.
Well, what do you see things from a different lens? What are your thoughts about AI and its ability to help defenders protect the endpoint?
Well, a couple of points there. So I totally agree with Justin. It's about the data. It's about having that data. And we actually make a lot of effort in kind of bringing that data into a single place where it can be analyzed, right? So now, once we have the data there, is what sort of models you kind of apply to that and kind of trying to find or achieve the goal, or meet a particular goal. But you definitely need to know exactly what you're looking for and what you're trying to achieve. Now, I think I would like to kind of ask questions to Justin, because one thing about the data is that we can collect data from all the different sorts of devices, right? So we get all the, not only the endpoints, but also the network kind of components, et cetera, but it's what kind of data, right? So I have been kind of looking into this for a while and kind of realizing that security data might not be enough, right? So we may need more stuff, potentially business data, transactional data. So kind of trying to kind of fit some context into the whole environment. But I don't know, Justin, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And that is something that DarkTrace is even looking into. How can we expand out the telemetry we're bringing in? You nailed it on the head. It's not just layer 2, layer 3. It's not just API data coming from the various different environments you're in, but all the other data that you're also sitting on that maybe business units are using. Fun fact for everybody, we went with unsupervised machine data from the very beginning, the very early days, for the very simple fact that there is no training data out there for every network around the globe. And I think that you bring up a great point. Make sure you've got good, clean data to bring into your project. And that's probably the hardest thing with getting any AI ML project up and running, getting the good data in, processing it, knowing what features to look at, and then applying it correctly. So I do think that is a great kind of forecast of where the industry is going to go. You're going to see even more analytical power being thrown at all the various different data lakes that we as businesses are sitting in and just struggling to make sense of.
Yeah.
So I can dig into, sorry, Juan.
Okay.
No, Juan, I had some questions too. This is great.
No, sorry. I just kind of wanted to add a different kind of challenge or a second challenge that I have on top of this. It's about what technology. Is the technology mature enough to actually for us to be able to leverage? What is the return on investment? And I'm not talking about a financial exercise, but on what is my kind of a money-based place, whether it is going to be on investing in machine learning or probably going in some other kind of solution to kind of cover also the risk. At the end of the day, I am responsible for protecting my organization, right? So what is the kind of the best way? But those are the kind of thinking and challenges that we are kind of facing as we evolve our security program.
My question to Justin was, hey, go back and tell me about the difference between unsupervised and supervised machine learning. Why did you make that decision, and why was it important?
Yeah, I mean, and just, for full transparency, we at DarkTrace use all of them. We use unsupervised, supervised deep learning in various different projects. And that's why I say using the right form of ML is probably the first step. Unsupervised machine learning, plain and simple, it's not structured labeled data. I'm just kind of throwing the kitchen sink at it, and the system is figuring out on its own. And as I mentioned before, we're all using similar technologies and protocols, but ultimately, everybody's network has its own digital fingerprint or genome, so to speak. And so we have to have the ability to establish that sense of self in the environment we're in to determine if that light bulb is doing something that it shouldn't be doing in a sea of 100,000 plus endpoints. Supervised machine learning on the other end is using very structured data. I have trained data. I've already gone through it. I've labeled everything with the hopes that the system will learn based off of that. And when I let it loose on its own, it already has an idea of what it's looking for. And so that's the kind of the two biggest, differences. There's some great videos on YouTube. I won't do them any justice talking about the difference between determining a cat and a dog, which is kind of machine learning 101. But that's usually a good place to start, just understanding the difference between supervised and unsupervised.
Awesome. Hey, Kirsten, you talked about visibility. Everything's now generating terabytes of data, it seems, even their light bulb, your escalator, whatnot. Kirsten, how do you feel about, about the individuals in the SOC being overwhelmed just by the amount of data that they have to sit through, the different threat vectors, and how are they going to approach some of these challenges?
I think that's a great question, Kevin. This is, really where SOAR comes into place, I think. So being able to use automation, I'm seeing everything, like I'm actually seeing companies that are creating like SOC analyst bots at this point in time. And these SOC analysts that aren't even real humans are able to investigate and close tickets. And we really are seeing like just an insane amount of alert fatigue. And that is because there's just so much information for these analysts to deal with. And I think one of the key things when we say visibility, I really truly believe that you need it across all the networks. And in my experience, once we start turning on these OT environments, you've got another 3,000, maybe 5,000 assets that you didn't know about. And now that SOC analyst is going to be getting alerts from that part of the network. So really understanding what you're looking at. And I know I am a visibility champion. And I think the reason for that is when you're using such cool technology like machine learning and behavioral analytics, you can actually baseline these OT. These environments are pretty boring and in a good way. I say that excitedly because it's not as intimidating to go into them.
Open, close.
Yeah, it's very static in nature. So like right now, I feel like while we're dealing with incidents, we're catching it at the very end when it's already been executed. Imagine if you had the ability to actually see the attacker doing the reconnaissance. And this idea that an attack takes like a second to happen, no. They're in there for a long time. And if you can catch them while they're sniffing around and in an environment that's been baselined, that is really quite easy to do. It's the attacker is going to spin up a new protocol into that environment. Well, that's an alert. Your SOC analyst is going to say, who's using FTP in the process control network and how is it getting out? So visibility, again, I think it's key. And I really do think that the more networks, though, that we get visibility to, the more alerts that we're going to see. And if we don't look at automation SOAR as a component, I do think that, we're going to suffer even worse alert fatigue in the future.
Let's stay at layer 8 for a minute, Kirsten, then. We're still going to have people look at stuff, right? So most of us have been trained in IT, and we think about endpoints as computers or some sort of device and whatnot. Well, now we're unloading all of these devices, you said, within the IoT space. How should organizations approach that? Should we be training IT people to be OT specialists? Should we be training OT people to be IT specialists? These are probably groups of people who have never interacted with each other before, but now have a cross and shared responsibility. What are your thoughts on the layer 8 aspects or the people aspects of managing these endpoints?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And I've seen it. I've seen teams that are being created at large organizations that are specialized units of both. And they really do bring the right skill sets to the table. So I always say, you can train a security analyst to patch a server. You can train an engineer to patch a server, but it's not really vice versa. You can't train the security analyst to program a PLC, and you can't train the engineer to do threat hunting. So the skills that each of these teams bring together, I think it's key and it's critical. And I think that when you have that ability, and to be honest, the majority of the types of alerts that I see in the OT environment are network-based, and these analysts and SOCs, they understand what networks are. So, they understand what clear text passwords are. They understand what RDP is. So I think that there's an overlap, but I do think that we need to kind of focus on creating more teams that are a bit cohesive, where we can learn from each other on both sides.
Juan, same question to you. You've worked in this space as well. How do we manage the layer 8 aspects? How do we handle the people problem? Do we cross-train? Do we build a new set of teams? How do we, as an organization, approach some of these problems?
Yeah, it's such a great question and so difficult to answer in a way. But one thing
that's why I asked you.
So a couple of things here. So one is obviously not all companies will have the privilege or the availability of resources to be able to kind of form a cohesive team in a way, right? Because I think that's a great idea. But in our organizations where we have limited resources, what we try to do is to collaborate a lot, is to actually develop those relationships. And at the end of the day, it's about relationship, it's about sharing tools, it's about sharing common grounds in a way that we can investigate. We may have the visibility, but we need to ask the question to those guys, say, hey, what do you think it is, right? A PLC trying to call, an external IP address, for example. So, and that's where we are kind of trying to first educate on the kind of overall sort of idea or concept, what should be kind of the allowed or permissible, or not just the permissible, but the normal behavior in a way, and what is not supposed to happen, right? So that's where it comes down to. Good relationships, collaboration, a lot of collaboration between the teams, and a great relationship. That's a key for me.
I would just add, I think both of you bring up a great point in that engineers think with one side of the brain and analysts think very differently. And I've argued for quite some time, an analyst is never going to configure a firewall, maybe never even write a single line of code, but they're going to think outside the box, and they're going to look at that data, and they're going to tell a story based on what they're seeing. And so I think it's a combination of things, but I also think one thing we haven't talked about is it's up to HR to start thinking a little bit differently about hiring. We don't necessarily need someone with a computer science background. We've done studies in this for quite a few years now that someone with a psychology background or even a language background can be a very strong cyber analyst when given the core fundamentals of what they need to look for. And so that is something as an industry that I do think we need to think a little bit differently about, is just hiring practice. They're out there. There are a lot of people that want jobs. We need to get out of this kind of stigma of this is the only type of person I'm going to hire. And I think that's one step, to kind of addressing that problem.
Just a follow-up question on that. I mean, do you think the fact that some of us have spent 20 plus years in the industry and we think a certain way, we're set in our ways, is actually creating a bias that's hindering us? And diversity of thought on the team can really open those doors. I give the thought experiment to a lot of CISOs. You've hired a lot of computer science graduates. Your main nemesis is a cyber criminal who thinks Axon was trained completely different of you. Maybe you should look at diversity. What do you think? Are we part of the problem? Those old guys like me who've been around quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many old timers, so to speak, I meet with that are just so stuck in their ways that they're not willing to embrace this new AI world we live in and some of these new approaches to doing things. I've long been saying for the last few years, legacy security is long dead. If you are doing anything the way you were doing it a few years ago, you're way behind the curve, and good luck playing catch up. So I do think we are a part of that problem. I'm starting to see that shift. It definitely is changing. You're starting to see the new C-suite, the new CISOs out there are a little bit younger, have a little bit more recent experience out in the field and boots on the ground and bringing that to the job. So I do think you're going to see that generational shift. And I think you nailed it on the head, though. I do think it is a little bit of a diversity problem, and it is definitely slowly starting to shift.
Great. Well, actually, Kirsten, let's ask you. You and I have talked about this topic considerably over the last year or so. You moved into a career of OT, not kind of non-standard for any cybersecurity professional, and really develops a great deal of expertise watching packets move and watching sort of the bad guys. How did you get into a career? What was your interest? What made you look at a SCADA system and say that's where I'm going to spend my time and career?
That's a great question, Kevin. Like, I've always kind of been obsessed with packets. I was trained for intrusion analysis, and so really figuring out, is data being exfiltrated? Has somebody broke in? I started segmenting networks using firewalls for some large oil and gas companies in Calgary. That's where I got exposed to the protocols, and I'm also a bit of a protocol junkie, so I really do love protocols. And all of a sudden I was seeing protocols I'd never even heard of. What does this protocol do? And learning function codes. And for me, it was being able to understand the protocol helps me secure and really segment that network as best as I can. That being said, though, in addition to kind of what you're saying, I did say that I've been in this career for 20 years now. And I believe what you just said, Kevin. I do think that we do have some bias. I'm a dinosaur. And I do clearly recall a time right before I joined Microsoft, actually, where I was on the floor in a factory, covered in dust, trying to feed this Ethernet cable to a switch, but there was too much dust. And I just started laughing. And I was like, Kirsten, why are you so afraid of the cloud? Like, look at yourself. You are on the ground, covered in dust, and you're terrified of the cloud. Get up, get over yourself. Like, you need to stop. And so it really kind of led me to realize that my inability or to embrace change, and that change was the cloud infrastructure. For me, I was terrified because it didn't use the networking foundations that I knew intimately. And so I don't like change. A lot of network people don't like change. And so when the cloud was introduced, it was very scary because it used a different fabric. And once I learned it, I'm much better now. But I think that, yeah, I do think that, we do bring a sense of bias.
So how do we get younger people and people who have different backgrounds in terms of diversity into the profession? How can we attract them? How can we get them as excited about SCADA systems or endpoint detection as you were in your early day? When it's kind of a hard sell to say, here's a water treatment plan. How would you protect that to a young person? What are some of your thoughts on getting that next generation engaged and involved?
There's this certain, and I don't know, there's no English word that I can use to describe this, but there's a certain feeling that you get when you find something that you've been hunting for, when you uncover, it's really the same feeling you get when you win a game or a puzzle. So for me, I think it's really important, and this is something that I do spend my time doing, is speaking to university students or people new in their career and inviting them to join Capture the Flag. So if you join the Capture the Flag, you're going to get that feeling. Like when you solve the puzzle, you're going to get that feeling. And then that's real life. Like when you're working, that's what makes it so exciting. It might be 14 hours of pouring through logs, but when you find the hit, you're that you're in the path that you want to be. So for me, I think it's kind of taking it to a game level, the CTF, making it a little bit less scary, but then realizing like this is what you would actually get paid to do, and kind of normalize it that way.
Kevin, one thing that I tell a lot of mentees is, unlike the network world, I get ransomed, my computer screen goes dark. It's very different. The OT transfers to the kinetic, very real world. So you don't open a valve when it needs to be opened, you get explosions, or you get water that is, not potable. And I think that's the biggest difference, moving from the cyberspace into the very real world and the ramifications it has to society. We take for granted having the lights on and having running water. That I think is the draw, or at least I've found where the light bulb goes off and they're like, oh my gosh, that's like a real mission, keeping the lights on so that my parents can, still do what they're doing, and my grandma, et cetera. And that I think is, at least for me, the exciting part about the OT space and what keeps me up at night.
Justin, is one of the challenges with that younger folks have never grown up in a world without an internet. They never know a world without where the lights went out and whatnot. Is that going to be a challenge for them in their career to think like a security professional? Because when we look at stuff, we think, hey, how would I break that? If they've just always assumed this stuff has always worked and always on, is that going to be a challenge for them entering the industry?
Well, I will say here in the US, we experienced the Colonial Pipeline incident. I live in the DC area, so I sat on long lines or drove all over the place looking for fuel. I hate to say it, but they're going to have to experience something in their lifetime to be that wake up call. And if you follow what, Department of Homeland Security here in the US and CISA are putting out, it is all things ICS. I mean, there is a very specific reason, and I don't need to spell it out for folks, why they are pushing for ICS security, because the writing is on the wall. We are heading towards a world where wars are not fought with bullets anymore. They are fought with ones and zeros. And a nation is going to attempt, they already have attempted to turn the lights out or shut down Wall Street. And so I hope that we don't have to have an event like that to wake up everybody. But I think you bring up a great point. A lot of this generation really takes for granted because it's all they've ever known. And I just kind of assume it's a part of life. But there are people on the back end, keeping things up and running.
Yes, Gen X can offer that. We're cynics. Yeah. That's our value prop, I guess.
You know what? Give them an old school 56K modem and let them live with it for a week and then come back and talk to us.
Well, let's close off layer 8. Oh, sorry, Kirsten.
One thing that I realized, I think that might have got me into this as well, is I was in Montreal for the ice storm way back, like so many years ago, and we had 14 days without power. So and at that time I was not in cybersecurity. I was 18 years old, but I think having experienced no power for 14 days, really, I knew what it was like to lose the power. Luckily, we were safe and had friends to stay at. But I think that was another thing, is I did have an experience where, yikes. And anyone in our industry, I think, that works in OT, we're all very, very fearful. We all want self-sustaining houses in the forest with no reliance on the grid.
Well, actually, that's a great segue. The pandemic has just exponentially accelerated digital transformation. So we're all working from home. We've all got all these endpoints that you're utilizing. I don't think we're going back to any sort of normal. This is the way we're going to work now, and it's going to continue to change. So Juan, what does that transition look like, and what can we be doing now? Because those that invested in digital transformation early were able to weather and sometimes even be successful during the pandemic in a quick changeover. How do we start to think about preparing now for that next big thing that's going to come along? And now it's not just PCs or laptops, it's all the endpoints that a business relies on that may or may not be owned by the company. So what do you think, Juan? Where do we go next?
So it's a great question, and it's something that is very close to my heart right now. So you explained it well. So for most of us who are in corporate offices or in a kind of a normal office, 9 to 5 kind of jobs, for us, the transition probably was easy. Yeah, it was accelerated. We probably had to go through a process of re-educating or helping the users to adapt to a new reality, working from home, bringing new technology to help to protect them now outside the perimeter, no perimeter anymore, right? When it comes to operations, it's a completely different field, right? Because traditionally, these OT environments are not connected to anything, right? So they are very critical for the organization. They are completely segregated, separated from, let's say, physical world in a way that they can actually operate autonomous, right? But they need people in there. So when it comes about pandemic, when it comes that operations have to be closed because the country says you cannot really send these guys to work, that's start thinking about, how we actually open these environments in a way that can be operated remotely. That kind of change completely the perspective and the game plan completely, right? So in a way, that you start thinking about, OT devices were not really designed to have security in mind. Open the perimeter for OT devices is like I don't know, because they are completely vulnerable. Some of them can be kind of manipulated via email, for example, things like that. So definitely you start thinking about how we can start changing the model where we can actually open up more this OT environment in a way that is secure, but that it can interconnect with other systems outside, or it can be managed outside by the trusted people. How we can actually do that kind of thing. So definitely it's kind of changing that. And yes, the pandemic is kind of at the end of the tunnel. Definitely we are not gonna go back to the 100% to the normal as we knew it. And definitely we need to kind of start thinking about how we were gonna operate this kind of, for example, in my case, mines of the future, right? So they are going to be let's say, autonomous, they can be operated remotely. The concept existed a long time ago, but they haven't been applied just because there was no really acceleration or push to actually do that.
Juan, let's stop there and tell us about the mine of the future. What is the mine of the future going to look like? Because when I think of mining, I think of, helmet with a lamp on and a pick. It's definitely not my area of expertise. What does the mine of the future look like?
So it's still kind of a visionary kind of vision, I would say, image in my head. But the thing is more on the less people on the ground, less people being exposed to the kind of the actual acts or whatever they are kind of trying to use to it doesn't work in that way now. Obviously, we have a lot of machinery there, but it's machinery operated by humans, right? So the mine of the future is going to be completely autonomous, it's completely robots, it's completely self-driving trucks getting into the sites, crashing the stuff, bringing that to a particular point where it's going to be crashed farther and kind of put the mill and so on and so on. So definitely it's going to be less people, more automation, more robots, and definitely control centers that are not even close to the site.
So mining robot, there's an interesting endpoint that we hadn't crossed yet. And I know this is an area that Justin's interested in. One, just to finish off that, and then I want to throw it over to Justin because I know he's done some research in this area too. Robots as an endpoint. Is it going to happen? When?
So robot is such a thing that is going to be quite, it's important to kind of look at all the different endpoints or sort of automation in a way that the way we kind of see these robots, right? Big mechanical arms potentially, but in a way, in simple terms, that kind of robots is just kind of something that is able to take action, to move stuff around, to kind of process, probably get some telemetry and potentially make decisions in terms of where that thing has to move to, right? So, and we have seen that in the major sort of kind of car manufacturers, kind of production lines and so on. So definitely the whole kind of concept of robot and how that actually means to protect those devices is key. Those kind of things can kill people, right? So the impact is huge. It's not just about stopping production. It's about affecting, for example, integrity of what you are producing. But most importantly, kind of leading to the how it can impact human life as well.
AI on a robot endpoint, Justin. The Terminator or Johnny 5? Where's it headed?
I hope Johnny 5, but sadly, there's already been some Terminator type AIs out there. There was just an article recently of a country out in the Northern Africa region that was using drones to action people. I won't go into any more detail about that, but you get where I'm going with this. And there was some very real moral, debates about that. I would kind of bring it right back. We're already there also we talked about the rolling endpoint that goes down the street, those are not much different. How about the car that drives itself? We all seen the videos of the guy falling asleep on the highway, or, the person eating their Big Mac while their car, does 70 miles an hour down the street. We're already there. And, it's moving at a pace that even I am kind of shocked by. I mean, you hear about in the US, these mandates of going completely EV by 2030. And with EV comes more automation. City of Las Vegas happens to be one of our customers. And for folks that don't know this, it's a smart city initiative. And they have been trialing driverless cars for years now and are actually getting ready to roll it out. At Black Hat 2 years ago, when there were still people, there were cars just driving up and down the street with a human being there, but just to monitor all the vitals. So we're already there, and it is out there, probably parked in many of our driveways, and we just don't even realize it.
Well, there's an interesting, and I pitched this around a lot of my head. What is a car? Is it an endpoint? And is it a network? Because once we define it, we can figure out how to protect it. I struggle to really understand what a car is from a first principles perspective, so I don't know how to protect it. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, look at just the supply chain issues we're having. Dealers can't keep cars on the lots because they need what? Silicon chips just to control them. I mean, back in the day, it was just a carburetor and 4 wheels. And now it's, I need a computer or I can't actually roll this off the assembly line. We've done some interesting research, with companies like McLaren Racing, Harman Audio, et cetera. And there is some, research that shows that by the year 2030, your average car could produce anywhere from 2 to 4 terabytes of data per day. So going back to what Kristin said with visibility and more data, just do the math on that and think of what 4 terabytes of data per day for an entire year looks like. the processing of that, the bandwidth, what the effects of 5G are going to be on that. I think you nailed it on the head. They're rolling data centers, they're rolling calendars, they're rolling personal assistants. I mean, they are every bit a part of our life. And that is another area that a lot of folks are not thinking about. How many of your cars have your email address stored in it and can actually communicate back to you? It's not going to be long before your car spearfishes you and uses that as a means to get into your personal life and actually then wreak havoc. So there is a lot of things that still need to be answered that I'm glad people are talking about. But man, it's going to be a wild ride, no pun intended, over the next few years.
Yeah, or payment details when you go through a drive-through or a toll. Could your car pay for you? It's a rolling wallet as well. Kirsten, this one's unique, I think, for you to answer. Supply chain and hardware. We always think about supply chain now in terms of software affecting the endpoint. How can a patch get on the endpoint and affect it? Is there, with the restrictions in supply chain and whatnot, and all these weird endpoint devices coming on, is there a new threat vector emerging of supply chain for hardware? Maybe a piece of one of the devices is compromised or whatnot. And how do we start to think about protecting? I've spent my entire career thinking of protecting the device's operating system. Never occurred to me that, maybe something within the device could be a challenge as well.
Yeah, I'd love to say that this is new, but it really isn't. So it has been discovered in the past. I think that, there are companies, startup companies that I've had the pleasure of speaking with that actually specialize in this. So they will validate your hardware with the special testing and tool procedure to really be able to pick out any, I'm thinking of the right word, but inconsistencies versus, we know this is a valid test system and this is not. So I think it's critical. I think it's something that we haven't had a lens on. And to me, it seems pretty naive of us to think that, all of these embedded systems with their chipset is trusted. A really tough thing for a security analyst to nail down. It depends on how the chip may be backdoored, but again, there's some really cool companies in the startup space doing some really cool validation of hardware.
And just to bring it to real world cases for everybody that's not following the news, GitLab, is just being exploited like crazy. Big clarity, not GitHub owned by Microsoft, but GitLab. And we all know source code is stored on there. Developers put it on there, whether they're supposed to or not. And I think we are setting ourselves up for a wave of supply chain attacks just because of the insecurity of that platform and how many open GitLab servers are still out there and vulnerable.
Well, and you're in a different sector of the business. I think about mining equipment, big equipment that's autonomous. How do we ensure the supply chain in non-traditional endpoints? How do we validate that? And is there any sort of either policy or compliance laws out there regulating how and we manage these devices?
I think it needs to happen. I mean, sadly, IoT looks at profitability over security. They worry about just getting it on the market as fast as possible. We've seen time and time again, even in 2021 going into 2022, we're still seeing insecure IoT devices. And so the question is, here in the US, if you want to sell a radio, for instance, you got to go through very strict protocols to make sure that it's safe. Why is it not the same thing? And I'm not talking about anything extreme, just checking off the basics. Is that default password not stored in there? Are we using basic encryption? I hope that, more organizations like NIST and MITRE will put out some recommendations. I know nobody likes the government getting involved when they don't have to, but as we adopt more and more of these devices into our lives, we have to start thinking about some form of regulation, or it's going to be more of a free-for-all than it already is, sadly.
Juan, same question for you. How are you thinking about how we can either self-govern, or are there compliance frameworks emerging that can address these big challenges?
So definitely the third-party risk management part of it is kind of being more relevant lately since the whole situation that happened over a few months ago. And the way we are kind of trying to tackle that, well, there are two aspects of it. So one is the fact that all these big machineries kind of things have been acquired for a few years already, and they have the life cycle, the lifespan of those devices are 100 years, right? So we are not going to change that. Incorporating sort of a better security or better way of doing things is not really viable, right, financially. So what we are trying to do is kind of working with a new supplier. So think like, for example, we are setting up new projects and really kind of asking questions about lifecycle management, how you are securing or assuring your software, for example. So it has to be more on the policy side of that internally, kind of make that part of the requirements. Yeah. So if this is not meet our requirements in terms of assurance of the software or the firmware that you guys are producing, we need to tell to the business, this is not a good thing to kind of to get into. And hopefully that will kind of put some pressure on these big manufacturers and start kind of thinking in different way. Because I think, Justin, you're right. They're kind of focusing on the functionality of it. Look at how little these kind of things can move around. And he can dance if you want. But that's not exactly what you want, right? When you want to kind of have that level of assurance that the software is going to keep the integrity, throughout the life cycle of that device in your mind side. So it has to come from that sort of self sort of kind of pushing policy, pushing your requirements, be able to assure that and verify that those kind of compliance elements of it. And hopefully the industry is going to be kind of start moving around, right? Self-regulating in a way.
Sorry, Justin. Yeah.
Just a thought, I was thinking about where is the insurance agency in this problem? That could be one solution to it, and going back to, the lovely theme of visibility that Kristin has set up for us, because I too am a visibility hawk. You can't protect what you can't see or don't know of. But where are the insurance companies saying, how much of your network is IoT, and are you within 2 or 3% of that actual number in identifying it? And then leading into what you're saying, Juan, is it patched? Is it up to date? Is it even have patches? Is it a supported company, or is it a sunsetted piece of hardware? I think if you want to shy away from the idea of government, which I think a lot of folks do, the insurance field would be the first place to start.
So Justin, if I'm not patched, or if I don't apply patches on a regular basis, is that the same as being a bad driver? My insurance company will look at that different. And what happens when my Tesla, I don't own a Tesla, but what happens when my Tesla hits end of life and support? Am I going to be able to continue to drive it? Are they going to continue to insure it? I have not thought about that angle. What do you think?
I think it's a perfect example. I mean, I can plug a device into my car's, input port, and it monitors my driving and literally adjusts my insurance on the fly if I'm an aggressive driver or not. Why is it any different? At the end of the day, we are paying a lot of money for insurance because we hope they're going to get us out of that bind if something does happen. I sure hope folks are going to kind of wake up if the insurance calls them up and says, sorry, we got to drop you because you're too risky as a client. We just don't find that it makes sense to keep you on the books anymore.
So that's consumers. Juan, what do you think about from the business perspective and insurance for cyber insurance on these big robots or these big machines that are going to do the binding of the future? Does insurance going to play a role in, in self-regulating the industry of how we manage these endpoints?
Just was going to mention it. Yeah. I obviously get engaged with our brokers and our underwriters about insurance and definitely see the sort of the changes and evaluations of how difficult it is now to get insurance, right? Yeah. And we haven't really got any kind of particular issue there, but it's tough. I wonder if it's not just for the insurance as me, in relationship with my underwriter, it's more on the kind of requirements or demands that you can make your providers to have a particular insurance that their devices are going to be kind of working up to the tick, right? So definitely I see a big angle there, kind of push like as a way of kind of asking the vendors to be insured, or to insure their products and devices against direct cyber attacks.
On the flip side, Juan, I have to assume autonomous vehicles probably have a longer lifespan than human run vehicles, just because they're more efficient. They're not making as many errors. They're probably reporting back maintenance schedules a little bit better. So again, I'm not in the industry, but I would have to imagine that would be a good thing from an underwriter's perspective.
No, it would be definitely 100%. It would be kind of more out of the human hands. Human hands are supposed to be the kind of the mistakes, but definitely the integrity of that device, which is completely autonomous, is kind of what these guys wanted to ensure, right? Because I can definitely trust, if that kind of has that backing of being insured in a way.
So let's get nerdy again and talk about zero trust, but a physical zero trust. Could there be a conditional access for an endpoint device, like a mining machine doesn't get access physically to the mine unless it's at a certain patch rate or whatnot as well? Do you see zero trust moving into the physical world?
It's a very good point. And definitely it is in some aspects already, right? So for example, you cannot connect any device to a network where it is not certified to have the latest up to speed, all the patches kind of things, even if it's a corporate device. So definitely, I don't see why not we can actually start enforcing that particular point, that you can actually introduce any new robot into our infrastructure unless has a particular, minimum levels of security. So definitely it can be the case. Thank you. Good idea. Okay.
Awesome. Well, let's we've got about 5 minutes left or so. So let's have a little fun. Let's put on our red team jerseys and let's think like offensive hackers. And I don't know, pick a thing you're interested in and walk through some scenarios that you're thinking of attacking. My favorite one that I've been thinking of lately is satellites. How would I as a pen tester or a red teamer attack a satellite, and what would that look like as well too? Kirsten, you've had some experience in penetration testing, offensive red teaming as well. What do you think the red team should be thinking about? How can they train? How can they prepare? And maybe some interesting scenarios that you've thought of.
Yeah, well, one that I ran into a lot in manufacturing was in most plants, there's a camera server, and the camera server has all the cameras that are in the factory everywhere. And the server, the poor server, it's like running Windows XP. It's not patched. There's nothing, there is no patches for it anymore. And for me, if I really wanted to get a good lay of the land from their manufacturing perspective, I'd own the camera server and I would watch. And that sounds pretty evil. And I realize that's really not me.
We've got our red team jerseys on here. It's totally, you're in a safe place. So.
That's not me. I feel like I could go undetected and have visibility into their operations quite easily with that one target.
So Justin, same question. You got your red team jersey on. You're coaching a red team on how to attack a landscape. What are your advice to those folks?
Shadow IT. I'm going to go after all the stuff that shouldn't be there. So if I can get a hold of a digital assistant or an unpatched webcam, like Kristin said, that's just got dozens of publicly available exploits. I'm a big believer in low-hanging fruit. Go for the easy stuff and then move upstream from there.
That's a great point. Digital assistants. How many people are sitting with an open microphone on their desk right now, whether it's a phone, whether it's a digital assistant or whatnot as well? So, and what would you want to gain from attacking those devices? Is it to move laterally? Is it espionage? Is it all of that?
All the above. Data is the new currency. So I'm on the mindset that anything you have, somebody else wants it. And it's just a matter of locating that buyer. So, I don't think any operation is a failure if you've gained access.
Great. Juan, same question. Put on your red team jersey. You're going to coach the red team about, the known unknowns of the endpoint world. What should they be thinking about, and where should they be testing?
Well, I would like to find one of those robots that will take instructions by email. That would be fine. I know with malicious intent, but definitely put it to dance or whatever like that. So that would be nice if I can do that.
Yeah, and where do you think the value would be in for an attacker? Is it state sponsors? Is it IP? Stealing IP? What would be the main reason or motivation for attacking some of these robots?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things. One is, for example, to keep, you can hold a company, a production line to ransom, because, for example, if you can attack one of these robots and can just kind of damage the product, the outcome, the final outcome, without they realizing what exactly the problem is. So they have to pay, because you need to kind of stop doing it in a way that for them to kind of continue, getting the good quality product in a way, right? So in a way, that's one way to do it. But definitely, if we are thinking, for example, about the competitors kind of market as well, or even foreign states kind of thing, you can start really messing up with somebody's production. Let's not go too far, right? Stucknet, right? So what's exactly what happened, right? So they kind of screwed up the kind of the centrifuges kind of machines and in a way that they couldn't notice and just because they wanted to stop something to happen, that kind of thing. So that will be kind of the intent for me.
All right, we probably have time for one more question, one more topic. So let's put our blue team jersey back on. We're in a safe place now. Again, let's talk about AI in the hands of the attacker going after endpoints. How are the attackers leveraging AI to go after all of these new endpoints in this expanded threat landscape as well? Juan, what do you think?
So I don't believe they are actually using it a lot, because there are cheapest ways or more effective ways to actually get into organizations, right? But if I were on a kind of again, an attack field, I'm trying to kind of use machine learning for something, I will be kind of training whatever to kind of find me the next target in a way, right? Because there is lots of users and a lot of people that kind of do have a very poor practices, and it's kind of about finding them, right? So that will make probably the life easier. But once found, they can be easy to target through a well elaborated phishing attack kind of thing. So that will be the kind of the way.
All right. Why don't we go to Kirsten and then Justin to sort of bring us home, because he has the greatest experience of this. AI tool, but also weapon. Kirsten, what are your thoughts on how we should be thinking about protecting endpoints with AI-enabled attackers?
I mean, it's just, I'm going to go back to my visibility. So I think having visibility in conjunction with a human analyst, I think that, I haven't run across a lot of AI attacks, but if I were to influence it, I would want to make sure that I was poisoning it with details so that I could remain as quiet as possible. But I think Justin hit the nail on the head. Attackers are far too lazy. They want to get A to B as fast as possible. And AI, I think it's more of a nation state thing, but maybe I'll let you speak, Justin.
Yeah, we actually started researching this in our own R&D lab a couple of years ago, and we did exactly that. We had to develop malware that utilized AI in some form or fashion. And the results were actually quite scary. Another shameless plug for Microsoft, a Microsoft researcher in India put out a great white paper a couple of weeks ago about using GANs and training the malware, against something else. And really a fascinating read. If anybody's interested, come find me on LinkedIn. I'll point you guys in the Microsoft direction. But I think everybody said the same thing. Attackers don't need to use it. We still have our employees clicking on the link. And so it's not necessary. But are nation states using it already? Absolutely. Every one of those big data sets that just disappears and nobody knows where it went, if you don't think that they're marrying them all up together and looking for patterns in between them and doing targeting, whether it's for espionage or whatever purpose they're trying to accomplish, you probably haven't been watching the same news that a lot of us has. So I think it's already being weaponized. I do worry about that time where a piece of malware gets deployed and, blends in so well because it's changing and it's so dynamic and it's thinking in not only three-dimensional chess, but even beyond that. The research is happening, which means the attackers are also doing it. So are we as far out as, say, quantum computing? Probably not. It's probably on the very near horizon.
Well, they haven't given me the hook yet, so if we are supposed to end up, let me know, please, organizers. But let's just double click on that as maybe a final word. We need to get ahead of these problems. So quantum computing is coming. There's harvesting happening. There's AI as well. How do we start to think now to get ahead of these problems for AI and quantum computing for attacking some of these endpoint devices?
Well, I think first and foremost, embrace AI. It doesn't need to be the snake oil that it used to be. It's going to truly be an AI against AI battlefield in the future. And yes, humans are still going to be at the cockpit and we're still going to be monitoring things, but it is going to be a machine against machine, algorithm against algorithm world. You need to embrace that and prepare for that. I think that's the very first step.
Great. Well, I think we're at time. So, hey, I think we covered all the known unknowns that we can think of. Actually, I think we could probably go on for quite a bit of time with this panel and this session. We took in a lot of great directions and had a lot of great conversation. Just wanted to thank each of you for being here today, participating in the conversation, and hopefully there's some questions and follow-ups that folks will reach out on the attendees to each of us to really drill down into. So, thank you for your participation today, and for all those watching, have a great conference.